The film Hugo, directed by Martin Scorsese, is based on a historical fictional novel by a very interesting character by the name of Brian Selznick. That last name should be familiar to those of you who are movie buffs because it's the same last name of David O. Selznick, whose great achievement in cinema history was the magnificent film called Gone with the Wind. Brian Selznick is actually related, but it's a very distant relationship. Scorsese chose to do this film, he once explained, because he wanted to deviate from the tone of films that he had been producing time and time again, which almost consistently involved violence. Those of you, again, once who are film buffs, think of Taxi Driver, Cape Fear, Raging Bull, Goodfellas, you could go on and on. But this film has a happy ending. He has chosen it because actually Scorsese himself is both a film historian and a person who is trying to save films that might otherwise be destroyed because of the nature of the composition of films. He's concerned about archival heritage. So the film that we're talking about today has two themes. One is the story of a young boy who is seeking an understanding of why all of a sudden in his life he's been thrown into desperation, loss of purpose, loss of meaning. And he believes that if he can find the right key which will enable him to fix an automaton, he will acquire a message from his now deceased father. So the child in the film is Hugo, played by Asa Butterfield, young 12-year-old Englishman who plays the part, does a very nice job, and who portrays Hugo as this desperate, anxious-ridden child seeking the message that he believes his father has left for him. So that's one theme. The other theme is probably more inclined with what Scorsese is interested in, and that is the rejuvenation, the recognition of a pioneer filmmaker who was actually considered by many to be the father of special effects, the first originator of science fiction films, the actual individual Georges Méliès. The last name I'll pronounce again, I can't pronounce the first name very well, Méliès. And Méliès in the film is played, as always, consistently, by Sir Ben Kingsley. You remember him from the magnificent portrayal which he did in Gandhi. I'm going to throw another film out at you, which is really hilarious. It's called You Kill Us, and Ben Kingsley did that on a lark. But in tonight's film, Kingsley's portrayal of Méliès shows us two sides of the personality of that individual. On the one hand, we see him as a forlorn, used to be famous individual, pioneer of the film industry, and as I said, the father of special effects including trickery editing. And that grew out of the fact that Méliès was, prior to being a filmmaker, was really a magician, theatrical magician. He really has three different prominent features about him. One, he was a theatrical magician. Secondly, he was a visual artist. And thirdly, he was this very fine filmmaker. His film, A Trip to the Moon, which you will see partly in Hugo, was released in 1902. It's about a group of scientists, astronomers, who get into a capsule, and they are propelled by a cannon shot off into the moon. The story goes that they are encountered by some lunar inhabitants that threaten them, and so forth and so on. A Trip to the Moon is considered one of the greatest films because of its significant editing, its significant visual coloring. It was actually hand painted. Each frame was colored so that it would create the effect of different costume coloring and so forth. Well, that's Méliès. So those are the two themes. Both of them refer to finding meaning, finding essence. What's the purpose in this existence? There's a third character in the film played by Chloe Grace Moretz. I don't know a whole lot about her. I've seen her in a couple of films. Now she's about 21 years old. She's an extraordinarily effective actor. She has played in horror films. She's been the voice in animated films. And in this film, she is kind of like the counter to Hugo. Hugo being somewhat desperate, somewhat anxious-ridden, while Chloe Grace Moretz's character, whose name is Isabel, is much more upbeat. She's adventurous, and she brings light to the character that I didn't mention. The individual who plays Hugo. Oh, maybe I did. Asa Butterfield. The young girl, also about 12 years old, is like Hugo, an orphan, and she's been adopted by the two individuals played by Ben Kingsley, and they're the Méliès family. So, one more character in the film that is interesting and a little bit mysterious. He's the inspector at the train station where young Hugo actually lives, behind the walls. He has been not kidnapped, but influenced by his uncle to take care of the big clocks that prevail in the train station. So the inspector, the station inspector, played by Sacha Baron Cohen, actually has two kinds of motives. On the one hand, he's seeking to find romance and love. He's having difficulty learning how to smile, which indicates part of his other aspect of his personality, and that is he becomes the threat to young orphans. If he finds a child without a family, he grabs them and has them sent off to an orphanage. So those are the main characters that you're going to be exposed to. The setting, as I hinted, is the train station in Paris, France. This is the 1930s, probably very early 1930s. Whether or not the actual historical Georges Méliès was uncovered at that time and regained his reputation for being the great filmmaker that he was is dubious. We do know that his films were recognized again both in America and in Europe where he came from. He was from France. But whether or not he as a personality was awarded any recognition after his fall into almost obscurity is uncertain. So you have these several different characters who are all seeking meaning. Meaning in the term of what's their purpose, what's their reason for really living. And it's theoretically answered rather cryptically and beautifully in a small scene between Hugo and Isabel. She asks Hugo, what would I be if my parents had not died? As it exists right now, I'm lost. And Hugo, looking out from the tower where they're both viewing the landscape of Paris, announces a very profound and beautiful message. A message that I think we can all take after watching and listening to this wisdom from this kid. I'll let you become exposed to it without my telling it to you. I hope you enjoy. I hope you gain some benefit from watching Hugo.